Welcome back. This week we move on to anatomical studies. So you will have a few different options to choose from, maybe some arms, legs, torsos, that sort of thing, and you're going to pay attention to the anatomy, try and replicate the drawing, and also kind of do a little bit of shading to make it look 3D. I'm going to talk you through some options on how to start this. Either print up the PDF, if you have a printer at home, or even if you pull this up and you're viewing it on your iPad, that's fine too. You don't have to print it out. But what you want to do, if you're viewing it on your iPad, you should be able to put a grid view onto your screen as you look at your photo. If not, you still want to try and figure out like where the midpoint is. So let's say midpoint is from here, where the very edge of this finger, and then where is the very farthest edge of this. So we're right at about, on this, 5.5. I'm not going to take 5.5 and put that onto my drawing paper. What I'm doing is I'm just finding the middle. So if we got 5.5, we got 2 3/4 is our midpoint. So my midpoint is about right here. Because what happens is people tend to put this in the middle and then they run out of room for this because this is actually going to be all the way over to the side. So here's my middle. So now I'm going to figure out the middle part of this too. So from the top of where this starts to the bottom part where the finger is. This is right about 7 inches. So same thing, what I'm going to do now is figure out halfway of 7 inches, 3.5. And it's okay to draw over this whole thing if I want to. So this doesn't have to be exactly even the way it's done. But basically if you think about it, what I did was I kind of made a grid. Right now it's into quadrants, it's into 4 different areas. I could keep going. If I wanted to really grid this even more, I could do that. The other thing you can do, if you want, if you happen to print it out, what you can do is a little aside. So let's say I fold this at the top to get the top mark, and then I fold it at the bottom part, right at that fingertip. Okay, so here's my whole thing, and guess what? I could do this. So when I fold this in half, there's my halfway point. I can fold it back this way. When I'm doing this, basically I know this is the top half of my drawing, this is the bottom half of my drawing. I could do the same thing to get this midline. So it's just another way you can do it. But you can either view it, maybe crop into it, on your iPad, maybe edit the photo, crop it, and then you can put on grid view. How does this relate to this? You are going to try and draw this bigger. When I'm doing this and finding my midpoint, let's say this is my whole paper and I got to try and use as much of it as I can. So right now I can use about 10 inches because the whole paper is 11 inches. So let's say it's 10. The middle of my paper is about right here. Same thing. If I want to go through here, halfway would be about here. So all this means is that this corresponds to this. So this bottom half is going to be the bottom corner. That's all, I know all I'm going to do is have that little bit in here. The bulk of my drawing is going to be here and here. But as always, you're going to start with a light sketch. So at this point now, I need to try and figure out how to translate this over to here. So one thing I'm going to do is my comparative measurements. From the top to the elbow, I'm going to get landmarks now. So from shoulder to elbow, it's just past the wrist. So if I know I'm going to try and do my shoulder to elbow here, and I can mimic the angle. This angle, I'm going from the head of the shoulder here to the bone part right here. So I got this, it's almost straight up. So if I start just even thinking through, I'm not worrying about all of this. One technique that this anatomical study is from, they actually do something where they break it down into recognizable shapes. So if you look at this, this is almost an ellipse, like an oval. There's ovals. This is a cylinder. This is like the corner of a box. This is down here, kind of a boxy kind of a shape. So all those objects we've been practicing actually come into play here. So let's say I'm just starting with, I'll switch to a darker pencil. You guys start out really light. I'll start a little darker just so you guys can see it. If I have, let's say, here, here, and then here's going to be that angle here. If I go from here to here, I need to make sure I have enough room here to here. I'm going to run out of room. because I need a little bit more for the wrist. So then I know this is too far. So then maybe I gotta do here and here, here and here. So I'm still making adjustments as I go. That's why we give ourselves a little bit of cushion, because then maybe it's like, you know what? I forgot about that inch, you know, kind of cushion. So maybe I'm starting it here. And I got to keep going with my comparative measurements. So maybe from this part here, I'll zoom a little bit, from here to here, this muscle right here, how is that compared to this? Look, it's even. So from here to here, and there to that angle. So remember that angle is a little bit below. So this to this, half, perfect. So then I kind of can start thinking, all right, this part is going to be in here, and then I got some parts that kind of bulge out. And then I get a part that goes straight, and it's like, same thing as always. Start with a light sketch, do some comparative measurements, see how it goes. Now I can keep going on my comparative measurements. How wide is this? I'll switch so you can see that a little bit better. From the outside of this to outside of this, what is the width of this muscle compared to the length of it? It's about 1.5. So just this part in here, 1, 2. Pretty close, but it's off a little bit. I think I made it a little bit long. I actually think the width is okay. But I need to maybe end that here, and that gives me a little bit more of here before this starts to this one. So this is how you would start this project. I'm going to fill this in a little bit, but basic concept. Grid it out if you want to give yourself enough space. Do big comparative measurements. Do these kind of comparative measurements, like how wide is, you know, the main part of the arm compared to this. So is this almost, right? So I got to fix that a little bit. It's about right. Half of this width to about halfway. I'm going to keep going with my comparative measurements. So what I'm going to do is sketch out the whole arm, and then we'll come back, show you the next step. We fast forwarded, so now we are partway through the project. You can see how I sketched out the main part of the arm. So what I want to go over with you is then developing the actual muscles. What we want to talk about is how to finish this off in shade and pay attention to that. On this particular one, this is actually kind of a nice way to illustrate anatomy. What they're doing is they are leaving a little bit of the line. It's kind of a striated look, a stripy kind of a look. I know I've been telling you not to do that, but this is a study, it's not a finished product. There's a little bit of length here, and then it's coming across. So it's kind of a nice technique. So as you are shading, I'm mimicking this style. So I did go up a little bit, and then I did kind of go over. What you really need to pay attention to is this right here. On my original, you see that. That's giving me the shape. It's showing that, you know, here's the, you know, muscle. There's like a side to it right here. It's not flat. This is a three-dimensional element. So as I'm replicating that, I need to make sure that I'm including that shading. So as I come along on this side, same thing. I have this right here, and so I have this right here that I'm starting to develop on this part. If you were to keep going, this part here, I would need this part to show me that part. It's a little bit of a 3D element here. And then I can still kind of start shading this way. The other reason we shade this way is think about all of these parts. Think about, you know, just even on your own arm. Let's talk. This is a cylinder, right? My arm is a cylinder. So as I'm shading this part, this is a cylinder, this is a cylinder. So as I shade, I'm shading and kind of thinking in terms of the shape that's created. But if you think about it, you'd have these ovals, ellipses. We said that this one breaks it down into like ovals and ellipses and kind of angles and hard edges. I'm kind of thinking about that as I start shading. This part right here is going to end up a little bit more like that, right? You can see this kind of starting. So I am going to still shade in. It's getting darker around the edges, but then I'm also going to add in this elliptical motion as well. So here is a finished product. This is a student's work from a couple years ago, but you can still see the same thing. This is a different picture. It's one of your options. Same thing though, they replicated that stripiness, but there's still a soft shading underneath. They paid attention to the comparative measurements. If it's a like hard edge, then go ahead and exaggerate that hard edge, but you can see how they did each section its own. And they're separate because in the anatomy, these are different muscles. This is just a good example of a finished product. You're getting a 3D look. So your whole project, you're gonna take your original, you're gonna scale it. If you want a grid, like how I did, find the midpoint. The grid section helps you in proportion. But don't forget, as I'm drawing, I'm checking this versus this. I'm checking this versus this. I'm checking this versus this. What's the width of this versus the length of it? What's the width of this muscle and tendon versus this one and the bone? What's this versus this? There's no possible way to over measure, okay? Let me stress that enough. I'm measuring and comparing all the different parts. Little bits, this part compared to this part. The width of this compared to the whole thing. You gotta keep comparing all those different measurements to be able to really hone in on this and get it, exactly right. So you're gonna pick one from the list. You're gonna draw it in your sketchbook. Start with a very light sketch, and then as you go, you can see I started honing in on where things were. I still have a lot of exploratory lines, and I will clean up my edges, polish it up a little bit, but it doesn't have to be perfect because you know what? The original one has some exploratory lines too. So don't feel like you have to get rid of all of these exploratory lines. It's fine. Only if they're distracting you and it's hard to tell where the actual drawing is. Then you can start erasing them. Do a faithful reproduction, paying attention to the anatomy. All right, that's it. Have fun.